I was 16 when the police officer showed up at our door. "There's been an accident," he said, his face grim beneath the brim of his hat. My parents had been driving home from their anniversary dinner when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. They were pronounced dead at the scene. In an instant, my world imploded. The next few weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, condolences, and the growing realization that I was now alone. That's when Aunt Rebecca stepped in. "Of course Olivia will come live with me," she announced at the reading of the will, her hand gripping my shoulder a little too tightly. "She's family." I'd always had a complicated relationship with my aunt. My father's older sister, Rebecca, had always seemed to resent him, though I never understood why. Growing up, I'd noticed how her smile would tighten whenever Dad talked about his promotion at the architectural firm, or when Mom showed off photos from our family vacations. But she was my only living relative, so I had no choice. The attorney handed me a sealed envelope. "Your parents left this for you to be opened when you turn 18, he explained. "I'll keep it in safekeeping until then." 2 years passed in Aunt Rebecca's spare bedroom. She wasn't cruel, exactly, but there was a coldness to her care. Basic necessities were provided, but little else. When I needed money for a school trip or new clothes, she'd sigh dramatically before reluctantly writing a check. "The insurance money from your parents barely covers your expenses," she'd remind me. "We need to be careful." I never questioned this. I assumed the modest ranch house my parents owned and their middle-class jobs hadn't left much behind. Besides, I was grateful to have a roof over my head, even if it never felt like home. On my 18th birthday, the attorney delivered the envelope as promised. Inside was a letter from my parents and a detailed account statement. "Dearest Olivia," it began in my mother's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, something has happened to us. Know that we love you more than anything in this world, and we've tried to prepare for every possibility, including this one." The letter explained that they had set up a trust fund for me when I was born. Years of careful saving, smart investments, and a substantial life insurance policy meant I had nearly $800,000 waiting for me. The money was to be managed by my guardian until I turned 25, with the provision that it could be used for my living expenses, education, and a down payment on a house when I was ready. "We want you to pursue your dreams without financial burden," my father had written. "Your future was always our priority." I stared at the document in shock, then confusion, then growing anger. If there was this much money, why had the past 2 years been so financially strained? Why was I working part-time at a coffee shop to save for college when there was more than enough set aside for my education? That evening, I confronted Aunt Rebecca, letter in hand. "Oh, that," she said dismissively after glancing at the papers. "Your father always was an optimist. Those investments didn't perform nearly as well as he anticipated. And after the funeral costs, estate taxes, and your living expenses, there's hardly anything left." "But the statement shows." "Financial statements can be misleading, Olivia," she interrupted. "Your father never did understand money properly. It's why your mother had to work so hard all those years." Her words stung, but they also rang false. My father had been meticulous with finances, teaching me the value of saving from the time I was old enough to have an allowance. "I'd like to speak with the trustee," I said firmly. "I'm the trustee," she replied with a cold smile. "And frankly, after everything I've done for you, this display of ingratitude is exactly what I would expect. You're just like your father, entitled and financially irresponsible." There it was, that flash of resentment I'd seen directed at my father so many times. But now it was aimed at me. "I want to see the account statements," I insisted. "You'll have full access when you're 25, she snapped. "Until then, be grateful for what you have. Now, I believe you have a shift at the coffee shop." I felt trapped. At 18, newly graduated from high school, and with no resources of my own. What could I do? I had been planning to attend State University, the only school I could afford with my savings and a partial scholarship. My dream school, Westlake College, with its prestigious architecture program, following in my father's footsteps, had accepted me, but the tuition was far beyond my means. Or so I had thought. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't adding up. I remembered how my aunt had recently renovated her kitchen, replaced her car with a new luxury model, and taken a 3-week European vacation, all while telling me we needed to be careful with money. The next day, instead of going to my shift at the coffee shop, I visited the bank listed on my parents' trust document. The teller couldn't provide account information, but confirmed the trust existed and directed me to the bank's trust department. "I'm sorry, but we can only discuss this with the trustee," the trust officer explained. "I understand," I said, "but can you at least confirm the current trustee? The original document names Rebecca Collins, but I want to make sure that's current." He checked the system. "Yes, Rebecca Collins is the current trustee until you turn 25 or meet other conditions specified in the trust." "What other conditions?" He hesitated, then said, "I really can't say more without the trustee present." I left the bank feeling both frustrated and vindicated. The trust definitely existed, but how could I access it if Aunt Rebecca controlled everything? My break came 3 months later when a piece of mail arrived addressed to trustee of the Collins Family Trust. Aunt Rebecca was out of town on another vacation, and I had been collecting the mail. My hands trembled as I carefully opened the envelope, a quarterly statement from the investment firm managing the trust. The balance was $742,658.91. There had been regular withdrawals over the past 2 years, large ones, but they hadn't gone toward my care. One withdrawal for $45,000 was labeled kitchen remodel. Another for $68,000 was marked Mercedes lease and purchase. The most recent $22,000 was simply noted as European vacation. My aunt had been stealing my inheritance while making me work for minimum wage and telling me I couldn't afford my dream school. I took photos of every page of the statement with my phone, then carefully resealed the envelope and left it in the mail pile. Over the next few days, I gathered more evidence. I found older statements in her home office during her absence. I discovered credit card statements showing purchases far beyond what my aunt's salary as a dental office manager could support. With this evidence in hand, I consulted a legal aid attorney at the university. "This is clear breach of fiduciary duty," the attorney said after reviewing the documents. "As trustee, your aunt has a legal obligation to manage these funds in your best interests, not her own." "What can I do?" "We can petition the court to remove her as trustee and appoint a neutral third party. We can also seek recovery of the misappropriated funds." "How long would that take?" "Months, possibly a year or more." I couldn't wait that long. Fall semester at State University had already started, but I was working full-time instead, trying to save enough for spring enrollment. Meanwhile, Westlake's architecture program, my dream, was moving forward without me. Then I remembered what the trust officer had said. Until you turn 25 or meet other conditions. What were those conditions? I returned to the attorney who had delivered my parents' letter. "I need to see the full trust document," I told him, "not just the letter they wrote me." He hesitated. "Your aunt, as trustee, would normally be the one to." "My aunt is stealing from the trust," I interrupted, showing him the evidence I gathered. "Please, my parents wanted me to have this money for my education. That's not happening." Perhaps it was the desperation in my voice, or maybe it was the compelling evidence of my aunt's misdeeds, but he retrieved the document from his files. There in section 7.3 was my answer. Upon enrollment in an accredited 4-year university or college, the beneficiary shall have access to funds necessary for tuition, room, board, and reasonable educational expenses to be dispersed directly to said institution and to the beneficiary for living expenses. I didn't need to wait until 25. I just needed to enroll in college, which I had been trying to do all along. Armed with this knowledge, I formulated a plan. I applied for spring admission to Westlake College, explaining my situation to the admissions office, who agreed to hold my spot from the previous acceptance. Next, I gathered all my evidence, the trust document, the bank statements, the credit card bills, and made multiple copies. I sent one set to the trustee department at the bank with a formal letter requesting enforcement of Section 7.3 and an audit of all previous distributions. Another set went to the attorney who specialized in trusts. A third I kept for myself. Then I waited. The response was swift. Within a week, I received a call from a new trust officer at the bank. "Miss Collins, we've received your documentation and have initiated an investigation," she explained. "In the meantime, we've frozen all distributions from the trust except those explicitly for your education." 2 days later, Aunt Rebecca stormed into the house, face flushed with rage. "What have you done?" she demanded, waving a letter from the bank. The account is frozen. How dare you go behind my back? I stood my ground. I know what you've been doing with my parents' money, the money they saved for my future. I took you in, she shouted. I've clothed you, fed you, given you a home for 2 years, and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from me in the process. I replied calmly, money that was meant for my education and start in life. You have no idea what my life was like growing up with your father, she spat. The golden child who got everything while I struggled. He didn't deserve that money, and neither do you. There it was, the resentment laid bare. This had never been about me. It had been about her jealousy toward my father, a grudge carried for decades and now transferred to me. Pack your things, she ordered. I want you out of my house by tomorrow. I had anticipated this reaction. I already have a dorm room waiting at Westlake, I told her. I start in January. Her eyes widened. Westlake? You can't afford Westlake. Actually, I can. The trust is paying for it directly to the school, as my parents intended. The next few months were a whirlwind. I moved in with a friend until the dorms opened, enrolled in my dream architecture program, and watched as the legal system slowly worked on recovering the funds my aunt had misappropriated. The bank removed Aunt Rebecca as trustee, appointing a professional manager in her place. The new trustee initiated proceedings to recover the stolen funds, and formal charges of financial exploitation were being considered. For nearly 3 years, I had no contact with my aunt. I threw myself into my studies, excelling in the program my father had once dreamed of attending himself, but couldn't afford without the financial planning he'd put in place for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Graduation day arrived on a perfect spring morning. As I sat among my classmates in my cap and gown, I scanned the audience out of habit, not expecting to see any family there to celebrate with me. To my surprise, I spotted Aunt Rebecca in the back row. She looked smaller somehow, her normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. According to my lawyer, she had been ordered to repay over $300,000 to the trust and had been forced to sell her house and luxury car to comply. The threat of criminal charges had been dropped in exchange for full restitution. After the ceremony, she approached hesitantly, watching as my friends congratulated me with hugs and photos. Olivia, she said when we were finally face to face. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied, unsure what else to say. She fidgeted with her purse strap. You look so much like your father on his graduation day. I waited, sensing she had more to say. I've been in therapy, she continued, her voice low, trying to understand why I did what I did. The resentment I carried all those years, it consumed me. And did you? I asked. Understand it? She nodded slowly. My actions were inexcusable. The jealousy I felt toward your father, and then toward you, it was never about anything he did. It was about my own insecurities, my own failures. She paused. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry, truly sorry. I studied her face, searching for the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. Instead, I saw something I'd never witnessed from her before, genuine remorse. I have something for you, I said, reaching into my graduation gown to retrieve a folder I'd been carrying. She took it with a puzzled expression. Inside was a statement from the trust, showing the full restitution of funds she'd repaid, along with a letter I'd written. I'm releasing you from any further legal obligation, I explained. The money has been recovered, and I've asked the trustees not to pursue any additional claims. Her eyes filled with tears. Why would you do this? Because carrying anger and resentment only hurts the person holding onto it, I said. My parents taught me that. And despite everything, you're still my family. I wasn't offering a fairy tale reconciliation. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, doesn't mend easily. But I was offering an end to the cycle of resentment that had poisoned our family for too long. What will you do now? She asked, wiping her eyes. I smiled, thinking of the architectural internship awaiting me in Chicago. I'm going to live the life my parents wanted for me, one where I pursue my passions without financial burden. I paused. And I'm going to honor their memory by breaking the cycle of bitterness that you couldn't. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was freedom for both of us. As I joined my friends for graduation lunch, leaving Aunt Rebecca with a folder containing her release from further obligation, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The inheritance my parents had left wasn't just financial. It was their values, their vision for my future, their belief in the person I could become. That was the true legacy, one that could never be stolen.